Hello there. So I wanted to make a short and reasonably concise video looking at ceremonial death masks and the reasons why we make them and what symbolic significance that they hold over the mind. And it's worth saying that some of the earliest videos on here were to do with mask wearing, and I was trying to contextualize that understanding by talking about how the human brain has multiple strategies that it can deploy to meet with the world's complexities. And I was also saying how mask roleplay and the ritual ceremonies that accompany it represent that outreach program of the brain to access and assimilate complex information through imitating it in novel ways. And I went on to say that this necessity for reconciliation with the complexities of life is highly important to us, not just as an extension of our need to make sense of the world, but also very much for our mental well-being. Because if we think about it, when we feel self-assured and our mental disquiet and our existential anxiety has been stabilized a bit, we're in a far better position to go out and meet with the world's uncertainties than if we were consistently in this state of perpetual anxiety about the world. And I think that symbolic representation and ritual ceremony addresses this issue. So what more can we say about how we go about processing complex experiences? Well, I did say in the early mask videos that one of the ways that we go about learning is through immersion. This is the way that we will learn language as children, for example. So it doesn't predominantly come about through only a formal, structured learning process like in a classroom. It comes about through direct interface and interaction with other language speakers. We could say that it's a more intuitive way of learning as opposed to a systemized way of learning. So for simplicity's sake, we can take from this that over the years, the human brain has developed multiple means to interface with complex systems. And this makes sense because it has evolved in tandem within an environment that is diverse and complex. So the human organism likewise has developed a diverse and complex skill set to interface with that world. So to draw this first segment to a close, what are the main features that we've learned? 1. Representing our experiences in external objects allows us to come to terms with complexity and aids in the regulation of mental health. And 2, the brain has developed multiple strategies to interface and process complex information, creating a dynamic model of intelligence. So now we've got our foundations in order. How does this complement our relationship to death? Well, first of all, we have to respect that an awareness of our own mortality is deeply effective over us psychologically, and we have to find ways of coming to terms with the overwhelming reality of that realization. Also, the significance of our accumulated experiences of watching others die, sometimes in quite unsettling or maybe even gruesome ways, only contributes to this unease that we feel about the death state. This puts us in a state of subliminal anxiety over our lived condition, and just because it may not pester us consistently every second, when we are inevitably exposed to the reality of death again, it cuts right through our daily complacency and hits us personally where it hurts. So, with anything this significant, it's inevitable that we would choose to embody and express this through creative works, and creative works are a prime vehicle for doing just that. We might see art as an alternative way of speaking, or indeed speaking as another way of representing things visually. So when it comes to meaningful phenomena in life, the brain will highlight these phenomena for representation. And when we look at death masks, we notice something quite interesting, because the whole idea of symbolic masks is that they simultaneously represent a central subject, whilst also embodying that within the identifiable characteristics of a human face. So a mask is far more prominent than an externalized representation on a cave wall per se, because the entire intent behind its creation was that it should act as a part of the human body. And when we see that body come to life, it brings the symbolic subject to life in the mind also. By adorning symbolic subjects as encasements around our bodies, we take part in a two-way act. For the practitioner wearing the mask, they dissociate from a part of their own personality and become psychologically conjoined with the symbolic subject. It becomes a part of them, and in doing so, the death subject takes on a new significance. And for the one observing the mass ceremony, they also undergo a very interesting metamorphosis. The visual personification of abstract phenomena into facial form tricks our brains into identifying that subject as another living person, while simultaneously recognizing the encoded presence of the symbolic subject that's being displayed. If this is a bit hard for you to believe, realize that the human subconscious does not recognize the difference between reality and fiction. It only interprets sense data, meaning that a created depiction of a death head is recognized simultaneously as being a created depiction and also as a literal translation of what it communicates. This might go on to explain why children compulsively draw faces in pictures of the sun. They do not need to be shown how to do this because they're relying on a more primitive way of learning. They are learning about the world through symbolic personification. We also see this a lot today in pop culture, where an individual will choose to don the motifs of death as a style of symbolic communication. The desired message that's being transmitted is usually one of intimidation, because they're playing upon the anxieties and the associations that people have around death, and by embodying them as extensions of their own being, these messages communicate, I am not what you think I am. I am dangerous. I can make you perish. Or even, I am death incarnate. Symbolically and literally speaking, they are an active agent of death in the ways that these characters carry themselves and the ways that they want the world to perceive them in these fictional stories. This also works into why people paint skulls onto warplanes and biker jackets. Like children, we don't need to articulate this when we see it, because we're using an older style of communication in the brain, one that reads and thinks in pictures rather than words. So, as we can see, the symbolic architecture is still there in these modern representations as it was in our earlier primitive rites, meaning that we still possess that original way of reading into complexities through alternative representation. We still possess a primitive intelligence that thinks and interprets the world in pictures. And so that's really all I wanted to say for this inclusion into the Powers of Death series. Only one more to do with both of them, Powers of Life and Powers of Death. And I hope that you've very much enjoyed this nice little short video. Thanks very much for watching again, and as usual, I'll see you again.